is one nation under God. And I'm here to tell you, if you haven't already thought about it, that part of the Pledge of Allegiance that says we are one nation under God seems almost, dare I say it, not true anymore. That simple Pledge of Allegiance that we all grew up with may seem outdated and perhaps even untrue. We are in a nation that believes in diversity. And I'm not here to tell you diversity is all bad. But when we become so segregated by racial, by political, by all the things that take us apart, and we suddenly see them and us, we are suddenly in a position where we have lost the one nation aspect. To be certain, mankind has always differed in opinions and differed in visions. And I'm going to be quoting to you from some of our founding fathers today. And if you study history, one of the things you will find in our founding fathers was they disagreed with each other frequently, and sometimes very strongly. Being of one nation does not mean that we all think alike. Being of one nation does not mean that we all agree. Indeed, it means that we, from differing points of view, come together as a nation, as an individual group, that we identify, even in our differences, the fact that we are part of a greater oneness. The other part of that Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, seems equally outdated. Gone are the days when you could go into almost every courthouse in this nation and find the Ten Commandments. Today, it's rare to find the Ten Commandments, and if they are there, somebody is probably filing a lawsuit to have them removed. We do not condone a faith in God because it would definitely not be representative of everyone. And I'm here to tell you that that part is not new. Some of you think that we are living in a generation that's completely unique to us. And I'm here to tell you it's as old as man. My first scripture today is going to be from Psalms 33, verses 12 through 22. And it reads, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people whom he has chosen of his heritage. The Lord looks down from heaven, and he sees all the children of men. From where he sits enthroned, he looks upon all the inhabitants of the earth. He who fashioned hearts of them and all observes of their deeds. The king is not saved by a great army. A warrior is not delivered by great strength. A war horse is a false hope for salvation, and by its great might it cannot rescue. Behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him, and on those who hope in his steadfast love, that he may deliver their souls from death and keep them alive in famine. Our soul waits by the Lord. He is our help and our shield. For our heart is glad in him, because we trust in his holy name. Let your steadfast love, O Lord, be upon us as we hope in you." Now, in today's society, I hear a lot of talk about making sure religion stays out of the government. And to be sure, this nation was founded to ensure that our government never founded a state religion. Our forefathers, who came to this country fleeing religious persecution, intentionally desired a government that would not dictate beliefs. They came from across the pond, if you will, fleeing a state-run church where different beliefs and values were not tolerated. And I am here to tell you that that is a fundamental foundation of our country. The ability for you to worship as you choose. And that does not mean that how you worship is going to agree with mine. Nor does it mean that I necessarily agree with what you worship. In fact, in many cases, I find some of the things that people worship in this country reprehensible. We are in a day where witchcraft is now a known and recognized religion, and I despise that. But I also, as an American, defend that. Not that I believe they're a valid religion, but because my country says we give you the freedom to worship as you desire. Now, that does not mean, as many would suggest, that we divest religion completely from government. Of the 56 men who signed the Declaration, nearly half, or 24 of them, held either seminary or Bible school degrees. These were religious men. They were Christian men. And they desired to see a nation ruled by religious principles. Principles that, no matter what faith you believed, could be construed as reasonable. The Ten Commandments, my friends, does fit that. Much of the world's governments base their law on those fundamental truths of the Ten Commandments given to God, by God, to Moses. Now, does that mean, because we're founded on that somehow this country is perfect? And I will tell you, we are not. There's a lot of folks today telling you how terrible this country has been. And I will tell you, as a history buff, some of that criticism is good and accurate. But I will suggest to you that this country is far better than any other nation I've ever seen in this world before, up until this point. Has the United States made mistakes? Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, if you go out looking for a nation who has not made mistakes, you will spend the rest of your life looking, because no nation falls into that category. Every nation has fallen short of its perfect goals. But I will argue this: of all the nations that have ever existed, this United States of America offers more chance for freedom, more chance for love and for respect than any other country. It is not an accident that we are the most heavily immigrated country in the world. People flee here for safety, for freedom, and we must never forget that. Does that mean we don't have to work on our country? Absolutely not. And I'm here to tell you, we have a flawed country, more so perhaps today than ever. I will tell you that throughout our history, we have many times struggled with hard issues. That Declaration of Independence that I spoke so clearly about just a few moments ago was a highly contested document. People argued over that for days and months before it was agreed upon. Indeed, we fought a civil war, primarily because we'd had to determine whether it is proper for one human group to own another human group. And from that debate, Abraham Lincoln gave one of his more famous statements that I have loved ever since I first read it. And he said, "The will of God prevails. In great contest, each party claims to act in accordance with the will of God. Both may be, but one must be wrong. God cannot be for and against the same thing at the same time." My friends, we will and always have and will continue to argue over the rights and the wrongs. But Abraham Lincoln's truth is correct. There is a God, and his plan is the one we should desire to follow as individuals and as a country. And I'm here to tell you that if you don't, bad things happen as individuals and as a country. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall." I'm here to tell you I've never seen more pride in a country than we have right now. And Proverbs tells me that pride tends to lead us to one direction. Be careful in your pride. It doesn't matter what you're proud in. And many people will have many different prides. But be careful, because pride does lead to falls. I find George Washington's statement, and by the way, for those of you who get the scriptures off the back, I've listed these quotes. So if some of you didn't get that and you want these, please let me know. We can print them off for you. But George Washington said, "Religion and morality are essential pillars of civil society." What he understood was that you can form a government on principles, but if it's not based on religious principles, it will fail. Because it takes something of a higher nature to discern man's plans and his actions. I found it interesting, and I had never heard this quote before, but John Adams, in his diary and autobiography, wrote, "Suppose a nation in some distant region should take the Bible for their only law book, and every member should regulate his conduct by the precepts there exhibited. Every member would be obliged in conscience, in temperance, frugality, and industry, to justice and kindness and charity towards his fellow man, and to piety, love, and reverence toward Almighty God. What a utopia, what a paradise would this region be." John Adams spoke clearly of a nation that he foresaw the United States of America being. Now, I will concede the argument that we failed to live up to his high authorization by not doing just what we said, following the Bible as it is. But never let it be told to you, as it is being spoken many times today, that our founding fathers were not deeply religious Christian men. And they understood that if a government is to be fair and just, it must be based on biblical principles. When we see God being removed and banned from our government and even our societies, there is a danger in losing that compass that we need to operate under. And what happens when you lose that compass? Obadiah. Now, most of you probably would struggle to look for Obadiah. He's one of what's called the minor prophets in the Old Testament. But he said in Obadiah 1:15-16, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and they shall be as though they had never been." What Obadiah is telling me clearly is that not only will we as individuals be judged, but we as countries and nations will also be judged. And I'm here to tell you, again, because of the way the world views things, that too many people want to take judgment out of the conversation. They want to hear about grace and forgiveness, but they do not want to hear that if I fail to accept grace and forgiveness, there will come a day where I must pay a penalty. And I think it was probably as clear as anything when Jonah was sent to Nineveh. Now, Jonah was sent to Nineveh to tell a nation that was slated for destruction. They were an evil people. They were also a nation that was the enemy of Israel. Hence, Jonah is not really all that fond about going and telling them to repent. For Jonah, Nineveh's destruction would be quite nice. He'd be wiping out somebody that he knew was going to be a thorn in Israel's side for all of time. So you know the story of Jonah. He took a different trip, but he ended up going back to Nineveh, and lo and behold, Nineveh repented. And Jonah wasn't very happy about that. But the truth of it is, very much like Obadiah said, not too long after they repented, Nineveh returned to their evil ways. And it wasn't long down the road where they too were in fact destroyed. God is a gracious and loving God, but never forget he is also a just God. If we as individuals or a country turn away from him and refuse to listen to him, we do bring judgment upon ourselves. We will suffer the consequences of our rebellion. That is not a positive, popular message today. We must understand God is a loving God, but he's also a just God. We cannot sin and blatantly take it and rub that in God's face and not expect for God to say, enough will be enough. There's a humorous story about a guy and a gal named Bernie and Esther, and they didn't go to church very often, about once a year. And as they were leaving the church, the minister says, it'd be nice to see you two in church more often than just once a year. And Bernie replied, he said, well, that's probably true, but he says, at least the two of us keep the 10 Commandments. And the pastor said, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. And then Bernie goes, yeah, Esther keeps 6 of them, and I keep the other 4. We want to do it that way. I want to cherry pick the rules that God has given me. I want to take and say, well, this applies to me, but this one does not apply to me. We want to do what we want to do. And I will tell you, doing that leads us to where we are. My country is quickly rejecting God in almost every way possible. We are witnessing government officials disrespecting our flag, condemning our country. Instead of working to improve it and find the flaws and dealing with those flaws, they call for its downplay. They talk about destroying this nation and starting over. The problem is, when they tell you that, they don't tell you to start over with what? And like I said, if you're a history buff and you study the formation of this country, this was no easy country to form. This document of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights were not easily founded. If someone had a better way, it would have been done 245 years ago. Now, that is not to say that we've done it well. But in this day and age, when I see so many people decrying my country, calling for its downfall, crying for it to be destroyed, and even people who are Olympic hopefuls rejecting it as a country of their origin, I find that a bit contrary to the fact that you live in this country. You have been blessed with freedoms in this country. I firmly support your right to disagree. I firmly support your right to believe what you want and to work towards changing this country in a better way. But please do not tell me that you can only do that by the destruction of my country. I'll be honest with you, folks. The question if our country can survive this remains to be seen. We literally are 245 years into an experiment. I believe it was Ben Franklin who, when a lady asked him what kind of government he was giving them, he responded, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. What Benjamin Franklin was saying is that, frankly, this is no easy task, this government we're making, and it will require hard work, not only from the government, but from its people, to hold its government responsible. We can, if we're not careful, watch our country disappear and not ever come to be again. That is potential in 2021. There is that possibility. What will not cause that to happen is when men and women of faith stand up and demand their government act in a manner that is behooving what our forefathers set aside. And by the way, for those folks who believe that if we just had a Christian government, we'd be all right. A state government is never the answer. And I never want my government to be Christian, Muslim, or any other religion. I want my government formed by men and women who believe in biblical principles and apply them fairly and freely to all. I desire a nation where, as Martin Luther King said, I do not judge a man by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. I do not want to see the division that we are exhibiting right now pursued further. I want us to say, look, we have differences and we have problems and we need to deal with them. But there is a point of being constructive or a point of being destructive. It reminds me of a story of a pastor who was on a jet plane and the plane was being bounced around by a storm. And one of the fellow passengers noticed that he was a pastor and says, Pastor, you're a man of God. Do something about this storm. The pastor looked at her and replied, Lady, I'm in sales, not management. I'm here to tell you, my friends, that as Christians, you are not in management. And I am going to try and tell you that it is essential that the church never does become management in the government. We must always ensure that the freedom of religion that our forefathers promised to all people who came to this country is respected. Even religions that I disagree with and maybe even loathe. Like I said, I am totally appalled by the fact that there are witches who worship under the term of Wiccan in our country. But I'm here to tell you that our nation defends their right to do so and should always do so. If we're going to change this nation, it is not by telling it to become Christian. It is going to be by telling it to return to biblical principles. Now, when Thomas Paine wrote this, Thomas Paine was in that time frame of what we are going to look like as a government. And he wrote, spiritual freedom is the root of political liberty. As the union between the spiritual freedom and political liberty seems nearly inseparable, it is our duty to defend both. My friends, as a U.S. citizen and as a Christian, it is my duty, it is your duty to fight for spiritual and political freedom. And I'm here to tell you that I see a despicable attitude that ever since 2001 and 9/11, where man in the United States of America have been willing to give up freedom for the sense of security. We cannot surrender our freedom in the point of security. We cannot surrender freedom without great cost. I do not suggest that it's an easy task. We live in a very divisive age. And I'm here to tell you that division is important that we explore. There are some very divergent ideas that we as a human nature and citizens of this country need to explore and say, hey, exactly what is it that this country will and won't stand for? And I would suggest to you that without a Christian influence, we will go down a dangerous slope. Thomas Jefferson wrote, God who gave us life, gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when they have been removed from their only firm basis? A conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated, but with his wrath. Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever. Thomas Jefferson wrote that some 243 years ago, and those words are as accurate today as ever before. What is going to happen in this country is yet to be seen. We can, if we as persons of faith stand up and demand that we return to a biblical, and I do mean that in a very liberal sense of the word, form of understanding our government and our dealing with each other. I cannot change my neighbor through hatred. I cannot change my neighbor by force. And I'm here to tell you that if you disagree with that, I can but show you history and even our recent news where that is being applied and tried and failed. What will change this nation is when men and women of faith turn back to their God, apply biblical principles in their lives, and begin to live lives that are representative of their God. I do not have the answers to whether this nation will survive, but I will tell you this: it will be determined on you and me if in fact it does or it does not. Abraham Lincoln, again, is one of my favorite presidents, talking about the Civil War, said, if I had my way, this war would never have commenced. If I'd have been allowed my way, this war would have ended way before this. But we find it still continues. And we must believe that he, being God, permits it for some wise purpose of his own, mysterious and unknown to us. Though we are limited in understanding, we may not be able to comprehend it, yet we cannot but believe that he is who made the world still governs it. He wrote that in a letter to Eliza Gurney, who was, by the way, one of the first women preachers in the United States. A Quaker, by the way, if you just want to know that I have a little bit of bias for her. But the truth of it is, my friends, much like Lincoln, we would prefer not to be where we are today. Most of you would prefer to go back 50 to 100 years to the world that we used to live in and not have to face the struggles and the trials that we do face today. But I'm here to tell you, my friends, that just like Esther, we are here for such a time as this. You are here to discern what God would have you say and do in the saving of this country and of his church. Today, churches are dying. And they're dying because we have lost our way. We have failed to put Christ first, and we have failed to follow that biblical example. And to some sad truth, I suspect that maybe the death of some of these churches is not a bad thing. And I say that with some apprehension. But the truth of it is, my friends, when a church loses their primary purpose of following and worshiping God, they have failed to be a church. When we as a nation fail to uphold the values that our founding fathers put into this country, we fail to be a free country. I cannot tell you what the outcome will be. As a Christian and as a U.S. citizen, I pray that we can do what God would call us to do to make this the kind of country that it has been for many years, where we represent all mankind, that we represent hope, that we preach the good news of the gospel, but we respect each man's right to believe as he will choose. That's no small task. It doesn't make it easy, and I will here to tell you that frankly, I don't know if we're up to it. And by saying that, I am telling you that the outcome is not certain. This nation and Christianity in this country could easily die. It has in several other countries. Many other republics, many other great nations have passed away in history because they led flawed and misguided ways. I believe that the reason this country has thrived as long as it has is that even with all the mistakes that we've made, we have based it on biblical principles and the respect for our fellow man. If we can return to that, I think our nation has a future, and I think the church will thrive. If not, I fear we are in those last times. That may be a grim presentation, or it may be optimistic, depending on your way of looking at it. And the truth of it is, depending on how you look at that, may very well discern how we move forward. I love, and I don't recall who the pastor was, but a pastor was once approached and said, "You know, Pastor, what this country needs right now is a revival." And I've heard that statement many times. And the pastor nodded his head and says, "I couldn't agree with you more." He says, "So go out in the dirt, draw a circle on the ground, step inside that circle and say, 'God, bring revival inside this circle.'" My friends, that is what a Christian is called to do. Do not tell me that, and I'm not saying that political activism is not a good thing. I encourage it, and I suggest that your Christian citizen duty to be politically active. But if you're going to change this country, if you're going to change the churches of this world, you must step inside that circle and say, "Lord, bring revival to me first, so that I can share that with my fellow man." If we do that, my friends, we are far from being lost. In fact, I have seen great revivals started by a few small individuals who did just that. Stepped inside the circle and said, "Lord, bring revival to this circle." If we do that, I will suggest to you that the outlook is very good. If we fail to do that, I would suggest to you the outlook is very grim. My question is for you, which side of that circle will you be on?